This is crazy HOA life. She brought a clipboard and a lie. You will not intimidate me into ignoring a violation. Karen yelled that my payment was applied to the wrong fee and that was my fault. She stood on my driveway with a clipboard and a bright orange stamp in one hand, waving a notice at me like it was a court order. I kept my voice level and told her I paid exactly what the invoice said. She cut me off and said the landscaping committee changed the line item after I submitted, and it was my responsibility to check the portal daily. The tow truck idled at the curb behind her, with the driver leaning against the door, watching the whole thing. I work as an accountant. I keep a clean ledger and receipts for everything. The Stonehaven Terrace Association sent me an invoice 3 weeks ago for a mulch bed violation. I paid it the same day through the online portal. Now, Barbara Moore, the landscaping committee lead, was telling me the payment went to the wrong bucket and I owed another $75 plus a late fee, or my car would be towed within the hour. She held up her phone on speaker like it was compliance, screen turned away so I could not see it, and said the tow company was already authorized. I asked her to show me the portal screenshot proving the line item changed after my payment timestamp. She laughed and said this conversation is not a debate, it is a directive. Then she slammed the orange stamp onto the notice and handed it to me. The ink was still wet. The tow driver jingled his key ring loudly and asked Barbara if she wanted him to proceed. I told him to hold on and pulled out my phone. Barbara stepped closer and said I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. That line stuck with me. Paperwork and vibes. I looked at the tow driver and asked if he had the actual authorization form from the HOA management company. He glanced at Barbara and said she called him directly. I asked if that was standard procedure. He shrugged and said he works with her all the time. Barbara told him to hook it up. I said I would file a complaint with the management company and the sheriff if he touched my car without proper documentation. The driver hesitated. Barbara raised her voice and said the violation was on record and the tow was approved by committee vote last week. I did not believe her. The landscaping committee meets once a month and the last meeting was 6 weeks ago. I was hosting a family event this weekend and my employer was already watching my attendance after 2 late arrivals during probation. One more tardy and I was done. I could not afford to lose my car or my job over a phantom fee. I told Barbara I wanted to see the meeting minutes. She said the minutes are confidential and managed by the records custodian. I said that was not how it works under Michigan HOA law. She ignored me and waved at the tow driver again. 2 neighbors stopped at the mailbox cluster across the street and started whispering while pointing at the tow truck. I felt my face get hot. Barbara was doing this in public on purpose. I pulled up my banking app and showed her the payment confirmation from 3 weeks ago with the exact invoice number. She glanced at it and said the invoice was revised after I paid and it was posted to the portal the next day. I asked why no one sent me an email notification. She said portal updates are the homeowner's responsibility to monitor and the rules are clear. I asked which rule. She pulled a laminated policy sheet from her clipboard and pointed to a section about landscaping maintenance fees. The section had nothing to do with payment buckets or revised invoices. I pointed that out. She said I was being difficult and wasting her time. The tow driver stepped forward and asked if we were doing this or not. Barbara nodded. I told him I would consider it theft and I would call the police. He stopped and looked at Barbara again. She told him to proceed anyway. I called the non-emergency line. The operator said they would send a deputy, but it might take 30 minutes. Barbara smirked and said the car would be gone by then. I asked the tow driver if he wanted to be on the hook for an unlawful tow. He muttered something and got back in his truck. Barbara snapped at him and said she would handle it herself. The driver pulled away without hooking anything. Barbara turned on me and said I just made things much worse for myself. She walked to her car and said she was filing an emergency compliance escalation with the management company. I asked what that meant. She said it meant I would receive a formal hearing notice, and the fines would double every week until I complied. Then she drove off. The neighbors at the mailbox looked at me, and one of them asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, but I did not feel fine. I went inside and pulled up every email and portal notification from the Stonehaven Terrace Association for the past year. The payment I made 3 weeks ago was right there. Invoice number, line item description, amount. I saved screenshots with timestamps. Then I searched my email for any notification about a revised invoice or a line item change. Nothing. I logged into the HOA portal and checked the payment history. My $75 payment was listed under a category called Miscellaneous Administrative. The original invoice said Landscaping Maintenance Mulch Bed Compliance. Someone changed it after I paid. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a neighborhood where every complaint turns into a fine if the wrong person is in charge. Barbara Moore runs the landscaping committee like it is her personal fiefdom. She drives through the neighborhood every morning with a clipboard and writes up violations for things most people would not even notice. A lawn mower strip pattern, a mulch bed 2 inches too narrow, a garden hose left on a driveway overnight. The fines start at $50 and escalate fast. I moved here 6 months ago because the rent was reasonable and the area felt quiet. I did not pay much attention to the HOA at first. Then I got my first violation notice 2 months in. The mulch bed along my front walkway was considered non-compliant because the border edging was not visible from the street. I bought new edging and reinstalled the whole bed. I submitted photos through the portal. Barbara rejected them and said the mulch color was wrong. I bought new mulch. She rejected it again and said the bed was too narrow by community standards. I widened it. She approved it but added a $75 reinspection fee. I paid the fee because I did not want to escalate. That was 3 weeks ago. Now she was back with a story about the payment going to the wrong bucket and a tow truck threat. It felt personal. It felt coordinated. I decided to dig deeper. I called the HOA management company and asked to speak with the records custodian. The receptionist transferred me to a voicemail. I left a message requesting copies of the landscaping committee meeting minutes for the past 6 months and any documentation of a vote authorizing my vehicle to be towed. Then I searched online for other complaints about Stonehaven Terrace Association. I found a neighborhood forum where people vented anonymously. One post from 8 months ago caught my eye. Someone wrote that they paid a landscaping fine and the payment vanished from their account. When they complained, the HOA claimed there was no record of payment and added a late fee. The person tried to escalate to the board, but the board president said the landscaping committee had full discretion and the complainant should have kept better records. The post ended with the person saying they just paid again to make it go away. 3 other people replied with similar stories. One person said they suspected Barbara was pocketing money or applying payments to phantom fees to inflate the budget. I printed the forum posts and started a binder. I labeled it Cold Case, Missing Payments and Selective Enforcement. Then I requested my full payment history from the management company portal. It took 2 days to get a response. The records custodian, a woman named Diane, replied that my request was being reviewed for confidentiality compliance, and I should allow up to 15 business days for processing. I replied that Michigan law requires HOA records to be available within 10 business days, and payment records are not confidential when they involve my own account. She did not respond. I called the management company again. This time, I got a different person who said Diane was out of the office and they could not override her decisions. I asked for a supervisor. The supervisor said the same thing. I hung up and called an attorney who specialized in HOA disputes. He listened to my summary and said it sounded like selective enforcement and possible embezzlement, but I needed hard evidence. He said the call would cost me $200 for a consultation, and any further work would be billed hourly. I thanked him and said I would get back to him. I did not have $200 to spare right now. My family event was in 4 days, and I had already spent money on groceries and decorations. I needed to solve this myself. I went back to the forum and messaged the person who posted about the missing payment. They replied within an hour and said they still had the bank statement showing the deduction, but the HOA claimed the payment never arrived. They said they gave up because fighting it was too stressful. I asked if they kept screenshots of the original invoice. They said no. I spent the next 2 days gathering every document I could find: bank statements, portal screenshots, email timestamps. I built a comparison chart showing my payment on the original line item and the altered category. Then I noticed something. The portal page for the altered payment had a metadata footer showing the last modification date. It was 2 days after I paid. Someone went into the system and changed the category after the fact. I saved that screenshot with the metadata visible. Then I checked the invoices for the other people who posted on the forum. One person sent me their records, same pattern. Payment applied to the original line item, then moved to a different category weeks later with no notification. I now had 3 cases showing the same behavior. I updated my binder and labeled the new section Pattern of Misconduct. Barbara sent me an email blast the next morning. She copied the entire neighborhood. The subject line was, "Reminder, compliance is not optional." The body text said one resident refused to correct a landscaping violation despite multiple opportunities and was now facing escalated enforcement. She did not name me directly, but everyone would know. My neighbor 2 doors down texted me and asked if I was okay. Another neighbor called and said she got the same treatment last year and eventually just moved. I replied to Barbara's email and copied the entire neighborhood. I wrote that I paid the violation fee on the date of the original invoice and requested a meeting with the board to review the payment application process. I attached my bank statement screenshot with the date and amount highlighted. I kept the tone professional and factual. Barbara replied within minutes and said my payment was applied incorrectly due to my failure to update my portal preferences, and the matter was closed. She said further correspondence would be considered harassment. I forwarded the entire email chain to the management company and the board president. I asked for a formal hearing. The board president, a man named Greg, replied 2 days later and said the landscaping committee had full authority over landscaping compliance, and he would not override their decisions without clear evidence of misconduct. He said I should work with Barbara directly to resolve the issue. I replied that I tried, and she threatened to tow my car. He did not respond. My family event was in 2 days. I still did not have my compliance clearance, and I was worried Barbara would escalate again. I called the tow company and asked if they kept records of dispatch requests. The dispatcher said they did, but they could not share them without a subpoena. I thanked her and hung up. Then I had an idea. I called back and said I was considering filing a complaint with the state about an unauthorized tow attempt, and I wanted to confirm the protocol for HOA authorizations. The dispatcher put me on hold and came back with a supervisor. The supervisor said their standard procedure requires a signed authorization form from the HOA management company, not just a phone call from a committee member. He said they made an exception for Barbara because she was a long-term client and had a track record of filing proper paperwork after the fact. I asked if he had copies of those authorizations. He said he did, but he could not share them. I asked if any of those authorizations were ever disputed. He paused and said 1 or 2 over the years. I asked if the disputes were resolved in Barbara's favor. He said no comment and ended the call. That was my first clue. Barbara was calling in favors and skipping required authorization steps. The tow company knew it and let it slide. I added that to my binder under vendor collusion. Then I got another email from Diane, the records custodian. She said my payment history request was approved, but I would need to pick it up in person, and I could not photograph or copy the documents. I replied and asked why. She said it was HOA policy to prevent unauthorized distribution of sensitive financial data. I said my own payment records are not sensitive. She did not reply. I drove to the management company office the next morning. Diane met me in the lobby with a thin folder. She handed it to me and stood next to me while I reviewed it. The folder had 3 pages. One was my payment from 3 weeks ago listed under Miscellaneous Administrative. The other 2 were older payments from when I first moved in. I asked where the original invoice was that showed the line item before it was changed. She said the portal only keeps the current version. I asked if there was an audit log. She said the audit log was confidential. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the page. Diane stepped between me and the folder and said photography was not allowed. I said I was photographing my own payment record. She said it was still against policy, and if I did it again, she would end the meeting. I asked for a printed copy. She said I could request one in writing, and it would take another 10 business days. I closed the folder and handed it back. She walked me to the door and said I should consider resolving this matter informally before it escalated further. I went home and updated my binder. I now had evidence that the portal was altered, the tow company bypassed standard procedure, and the records custodian was actively blocking my access to documentation. I still needed one more piece. I needed proof that Barbara was behind it. I decided to set a trap. I sent Barbara an email and said I wanted to schedule a meeting with her and a neutral third party to review the payment issue. I suggested we meet at the sheriff's substation lobby where a deputy could witness the conversation and keep it civil. I said I would bring my bank records and portal screenshots and she could bring her committee documentation. I kept the tone calm and reasonable. She replied within an hour and said this conversation is not a debate, it is a directive, and she would not waste her time on frivolous meetings. Then, she said if I continued to harass her, she would file a restraining order. I forwarded her email to the board president and said I tried to resolve this informally, and Barbara refused. I said I was requesting a formal hearing under the HOA bylaws. Greg replied and said the board would convene an emergency session the following week. He said I would have 10 minutes to present my case, and the board's decision would be final. I said that was acceptable. Then I called the tow company supervisor again. I told him I was filing a formal complaint with the state about unauthorized tow attempts, and I wanted to give him a chance to clarify his company's role. He said he could not discuss specifics, but if I filed a complaint, he would have to review all dispatch records related to Stonehaven Terrace Association. I said that was exactly what I wanted. He paused and said he would look into it. I thanked him and hung up. The family event was the next day. I set up tables in the backyard and put up decorations. My aunt and uncle drove in from Lansing. My cousins brought their kids. Everyone was relaxed and happy until Barbara showed up at my front door with a clipboard and a man in a cheap security badge. She said she was conducting a compliance inspection and needed to verify that my event did not violate the HOA's noise and occupancy limits. I asked if she had a warrant. She said she did not need one because the bylaws allowed for spot inspections during community events. I told her the event was private and on my property, and she could leave. She said she was documenting a potential violation, and she would return with the sheriff if I obstructed her. The security guard did not say anything. My uncle stepped up behind me and asked if there was a problem. Barbara looked at him and said this was HOA business. My uncle said it looked like harassment. Barbara ignored him and took a photo of my backyard with her phone. Then she walked back to her car. The security guard followed her. My aunt asked what that was about. I said it was a long story. The event continued, but I could not relax. I kept checking the driveway for another tow truck. Barbara sent me an email 2 hours later with a noise violation notice. She said my event exceeded the community decibel limit and I was being fined $150. I replied and said I did not have any amplified sound and the event was during permitted hours. She said the noise limit included guest conversations and vehicle doors closing. I replied and said that was absurd. She did not respond. I added the noise violation to my binder under retaliatory enforcement. Then I called my ally, a homeowner named Tom who lived 3 streets over. Tom was popular in the neighborhood and had been on the board before Greg took over. He hated Barbara. I told him what was happening. He said he believed me, and he had his own stories about Barbara moving goalposts and selectively enforcing rules. He said he would come to the board meeting and speak on my behalf. I thanked him. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community clubhouse. I spent the week preparing. I printed every document in my binder and organized them into a presentation folder. I practiced my 10-minute summary. I made sure to stay calm and factual. The day before the meeting, I got a call from the tow company supervisor. He said he reviewed the dispatch records and found something unusual. He said Barbara called in 3 tow requests over the past 6 months without submitting the required authorization forms. He said his company was implementing a new policy requiring written authorization before dispatch. I asked if he could provide a written statement. He said he could not without a subpoena, but he would be willing to testify if it went to court. I thanked him and added that to my notes. Thursday arrived. I drove to the clubhouse and parked in the front row. Barbara's car was already there. I walked inside with my binder and my presentation folder. The board sat at a long table in the front. Greg was in the center. 3 other board members flanked him. Barbara sat in the front row of the audience. About 15 other homeowners were scattered around the room. Tom sat in the back and gave me a thumbs up. Greg called the meeting to order and said we were convening an emergency session to address a compliance dispute. He said I had 10 minutes to present my case. I walked to the podium and opened my binder. I started with the timeline. I paid the mulch bed violation fee on the date of the original invoice. The payment was confirmed by my bank. 2 days later, someone accessed the HOA portal and changed the line item category. I was never notified. Barbara then claimed the payment was applied incorrectly and threatened to tow my car. I submitted a records request and was blocked by the custodian. I found evidence of the same pattern affecting other homeowners. I showed the comparison chart with the 3 cases. Greg leaned forward and asked if I had proof the portal was altered. I showed him the metadata screenshot with the modification date. He frowned. Barbara stood up and said this was a waste of time. She said I was twisting facts to avoid accountability. She said the payment was applied to the wrong category because I selected the wrong option during checkout. I pulled up my bank statement and the original invoice side by side and showed that the category on the invoice matched the category I selected. Barbara said the invoice was generated automatically and did not reflect the committee's intent. I asked what the committee's intent was. She said the fee was supposed to be a reinspection fee, not a compliance fee, and the distinction mattered for budget tracking. I asked why no one told me that before I paid. She said it was my responsibility to clarify before submitting payment. I asked why the portal allowed me to pay under the wrong category if it was so important. She said the portal was a tool and homeowners were responsible for using it correctly. Greg interrupted and asked Barbara if the landscaping committee voted to authorize my vehicle to be towed. Barbara said yes. I asked to see the meeting minutes. Barbara said the minutes were not finalized yet. I said the meeting was 6 weeks ago. She said the committee was behind on paperwork. Tom stood up in the back and said he wanted to make a statement. Greg recognized him. Tom said he had been a homeowner at Stonehaven Terrace for 12 years and he served on the board for 4 of those years. He said Barbara had a pattern of moving goalposts and selectively enforcing rules. He said he personally knew 3 homeowners who left the neighborhood because of her behavior. He said the board needed to take this seriously. Barbara turned around and told Tom to sit down. Tom ignored her and said the board should request an independent audit of the landscaping committee's finances. Barbara's face turned red. Greg asked Barbara if she objected to an audit. Barbara said the committee's budget was already reviewed quarterly by the treasurer. Greg asked the treasurer, a woman named Linda, if that was true. Linda looked uncomfortable and said the reviews were high level and did not include line item verification. Greg asked if Linda was willing to conduct a deeper review. Linda said she would need access to the portal's audit log. Barbara said the audit log was managed by the records custodian and was confidential. Greg said he was overriding that and directing Diane to provide the audit log to Linda within 3 business days. Barbara stood up and said this was a witch hunt. She said I was weaponizing the process to avoid paying a legitimate fee. She said the board was enabling my defiance. Greg told her to sit down. She refused. He said if she continued to disrupt the meeting, he would adjourn and reconvene without her. She sat down but kept glaring at me. Greg turned back to me and asked if I had anything else. I said yes. I pulled out the email chain where Barbara refused to meet with me at the sheriff's substation. I said I tried to resolve this informally, and she called it harassment. I said I then requested a formal hearing, and she sent me a retaliatory noise violation during my family event. Greg asked Barbara about the noise violation. Barbara said the event exceeded the decibel limit. Greg asked how she measured the decibels. Barbara said she did not need to measure them because she could hear the noise from the street. Greg asked if anyone else complained. Barbara said no, but that did not matter because the rules applied regardless of complaints. Greg looked at the other board members. One of them, a man named Paul, said he lived 2 streets over from me and he did not hear anything unusual that day. Another board member, a woman named Ellen, said the noise violation seemed excessive. Greg said he was tabling the noise violation pending further review. Barbara stood up again and said the board was undermining the landscaping committee's authority. She said if the board did not support her, she would resign. Greg said that was her choice. Barbara said she was serious. Greg said he heard her. Barbara grabbed her clipboard and walked toward the door. Then she stopped and turned around. She said this conversation is not a debate, it is a directive, and the board would regret this decision. Then she walked out. The room was silent for a moment. Then Tom started clapping. A few other homeowners joined in. Greg banged his gavel and said the meeting was still in session. Greg said the board would review the audit log and Linda's findings and reconvene in 2 weeks to issue a final decision. He said in the meantime my compliance status would be considered pending and no further enforcement actions would be taken. I thanked him. He adjourned the meeting. I walked out to the parking lot and saw Barbara sitting in her car. She was on her phone. She looked at me and mouthed something I could not hear. Then she drove away. 2 days later, Linda sent an email to the board and copied me. She said she reviewed the portal's audit log and found 15 instances over the past year where payment categories were changed after submission. 10 of those changes were made by Barbara's account. Linda said she also found 3 cases where payments were moved to a category labeled pending review and never moved back. The payments totaled over $2,000. Linda said she was recommending an external forensic audit. Greg replied and said he was convening an emergency board vote to authorize the audit and suspend Barbara's portal access pending the results. Barbara sent an email to the entire neighborhood the next morning. She said the board was conducting a politically motivated investigation and she was being targeted for enforcing the rules. She said homeowners should demand accountability from the board. 3 people replied and said they supported the audit. 1 person replied and said Barbara should resign. Barbara did not respond. Then, Greg sent an email to the neighborhood explaining that the board was reviewing financial irregularities in the landscaping committee and asking anyone with concerns to contact the management company. He said the board took transparency seriously and would share the audit results when they were available. I received a call from Diane the same day. She said she was resigning as records custodian effective immediately. She said the stress was too much and she did not want to be involved in the investigation. I asked if she had any final comments. She said off the record, Barbara pressured her to delay my records request and restrict my access. She said Barbara told her I was a troublemaker and the board would back her up. I asked if she would be willing to put that in writing. She said no and hung up. The forensic auditor arrived 2 weeks later. He was a certified public accountant from a firm in Detroit. He spent 3 days reviewing the portal's transaction history and interviewing board members. He did not interview Barbara because she stopped responding to emails. On the 4th day, he issued a preliminary report. The report found that Barbara moved payments to incorrect categories on multiple occasions, delayed compliance approvals to generate late fees, and authorized at least 4 tow attempts without proper documentation. The report also found that Barbara received a monthly stipend from the landscaping committee budget that was not disclosed to the board. The stipend totaled $600 per month for the past 2 years. Greg called another emergency board meeting. This time Barbara did not show up. Greg read the auditor's findings out loud. The room was packed. Tom sat in the front row. I sat next to him. Greg said the board was voting to remove Barbara from the landscaping committee and terminate her stipend. The vote was unanimous. Greg said the board was also voting to refund all improperly applied payments and waive any related late fees. The vote was unanimous again. Greg said the board was referring the matter to the HOA's attorney to determine if further action was warranted. Then he said the minutes would record the reversal and the reason. Tom leaned over and whispered that this was the first time he had seen the board act this decisively. I nodded. Greg opened the floor for public comment. One homeowner asked if Barbara would face criminal charges. Greg said that was up to the attorney and potentially law enforcement. Another homeowner asked if the board would implement new controls to prevent this from happening again. Greg said yes, and the board was already drafting a new financial oversight policy. Then a homeowner in the back asked if anyone had contacted Barbara to get her side of the story. Greg said the board tried multiple times and she refused to respond. The attorney sent me a letter 3 days later. It was a formal demand letter with attachments that forces a written response within days. The letter outlined the findings and requested that Barbara provide a written explanation for the payment alterations, the unauthorized tow attempts, and the undisclosed stipend. The letter said failure to respond would result in the matter being referred to local law enforcement. I forwarded the letter to my personal attorney for review. He said it was solid, and Barbara would have a hard time defending her actions. Barbara responded 5 days later. Her response was 2 paragraphs. She said the payment alterations were necessary for budget tracking and were within her authority as committee lead. She said the tow attempts were authorized by verbal committee votes that were not formally recorded. She said the stipend was approved by the previous board president and she assumed it was properly documented. She did not apologize. She did not offer to return any money. The attorney replied and said her explanation was insufficient and the board was proceeding with a formal complaint to the Michigan Attorney General's office. I did not hear from Barbara again. The neighborhood forum exploded with posts about the investigation. Some people defended her and said she was being scapegoated. Most people said it was about time someone held her accountable. One person posted a photo of Barbara's house with a for sale sign in the front yard. Another person said she moved out in the middle of the night. I did not confirm any of it. I just focused on getting my refund and moving on. The board issued the refund 6 weeks later. I received a check for $75 plus a waiver of the noise violation fine. The check came with a letter apologizing for the inconvenience and promising better oversight going forward. I deposited the check and updated my binder one last time. I labeled the final section resolution and included copies of the board's letters, the auditor's report, and the attorney's demand letter. Then I closed the binder and put it on a shelf. Tom called me a few days later and said the board was looking for a new landscaping committee lead. He asked if I was interested. I said no. He laughed and said he did not blame me. He said the board was also drafting a proposal to limit committee authority and require board approval for any enforcement action over $50. He said the proposal would go to a vote at the next general meeting. I said that sounded like a good idea. He said it was long overdue. I ran into one of the homeowners from the forum at the grocery store a week later. She recognized me and said she heard what happened. She said she wished she had fought back when Barbara targeted her. I said it was not too late to file a complaint if she still had records. She said she did not, and she just wanted to forget about it. I gave her my email and said if she ever changed her mind I would help. She thanked me and said she appreciated it. The HOA attorney sent a final update 2 months later. The Attorney General's office reviewed the complaint and determined that Barbara's actions violated Michigan's Nonprofit Corporation Act. They issued a formal reprimand and required her to repay the undisclosed stipend plus interest. The total was over $15,000. The letter said Barbara had 90 days to comply or face additional penalties. I did not know if she paid it. I did not care. The case was closed. Greg sent a neighborhood-wide email in the spring announcing that the board had implemented the new financial oversight policy. The policy required quarterly audits, mandatory documentation for all enforcement actions, and board approval for any fine over $50. The email also announced that Tom was the new landscaping committee lead. Tom sent his own email a few days later introducing himself and promising a more collaborative approach. He said his first priority was updating the landscaping guidelines to make them clearer and more reasonable. He asked for feedback. I sent him a list of suggestions. He replied and said he would incorporate them. I hosted another family event that summer. This time there were no surprise inspections, no noise violations, no threats. My aunt asked if the HOA drama was over. I said it seemed to be. My uncle said he was glad I stood my ground. I said I did not have a choice. He said that was not true and most people would have just paid the extra fee and moved on. I said maybe, but I could not let it go. He said that was why it worked. I did not argue. Barbara never came back to a board meeting. Someone said she moved to another state. Someone else said she was working for a different HOA in Ohio. I did not look her up. I did not want to know. I just wanted to live in a neighborhood where the rules made sense and the enforcement was fair. That was all I ever wanted. The binder is still on my shelf. I look at it sometimes when I need a reminder that pushing back works. The system is not perfect, but it is not rigged either. You just have to be willing to gather the proof, stay calm, and force the confrontation. Most people do not want the hassle. I understand that. But if you are in a situation where someone is abusing their authority and you have the receipts, do not back down. Make them answer for it. Make them face the consequences. It is the only way things change. If you enjoyed this story of HOA accountability and cold case justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild neighborhood drama where the receipts always win. The tow company changed their authorization policy because of my complaint. They now require written approval from the management company before dispatching to any HOA property. The supervisor told me off the record that my case was not the first time Barbara bent the rules, but it was the first time anyone pushed back hard enough to make them review their procedures. He said they should have caught it sooner. I agreed. The management company replaced Diane with a new records custodian who actually responds to emails. The new custodian sent me a message apologizing for the delays and offering to walk me through the portal if I ever had questions. I thanked her and said I appreciated the professionalism. She said the company was implementing new training for all staff on records access and homeowner rights. I said that was a good step. The neighborhood feels different now. People are more willing to speak up when something does not make sense. The board meetings are better attended. The committee reports are more transparent. It is not perfect, but it is better. Tom's landscaping guidelines are clearer, and the enforcement is consistent. No one is getting fined for lawnmower strip patterns or hose placement. The focus is on actual maintenance and safety. That is how it should have been from the start. I still check the HOA portal every week. Old habits. I review the meeting minutes and the financial reports. I look for patterns. I have not found anything suspicious since Barbara left. The board is doing its job. The committees are staying in their lanes. The vendors are following procedure. It is boring. That is good. My employer noticed that I stopped being late. My supervisor asked if I sorted out my personal issue. I said yes. He said good and moved on. I did not explain the details. He did not need to know. I just kept showing up on time and doing my job. That was enough. The family events are easier now. My aunt and uncle come out twice a year. My cousins bring their kids. We set up tables in the backyard and cook on the grill. No one shows up with a clipboard. No one threatens to call a tow truck. No one sends retaliatory violation notices. It is just a normal gathering in a normal neighborhood. That is all I wanted. I ran into Tom at the mailbox cluster last week. He said the board was considering a proposal to cap committee stipends and require public disclosure of all payments over $100 per month. He said the proposal was inspired by my case. I said it sounded reasonable. He said it would pass. I believed him. The neighborhood learned its lesson. Transparency matters. Accountability matters. You cannot run an HOA like a personal fiefdom and expect people to stay quiet forever. Barbara's house sold 3 months after she left. A young couple moved in. They have a dog. They seem nice. I introduced myself and welcomed them to the neighborhood. They asked if the HOA was strict. I said it used to be, but it is better now. They seemed relieved. I did not tell them the whole story. They did not need to hear it. They would figure out the culture on their own. If they ever had a problem, they would know who to ask. The cold case is closed, but the binder stays on the shelf. It is a reminder that systems only work when people enforce the rules. Barbara thought she could move goalposts and bury complaints because no one would fight back. She was wrong. The proof was always there. The pattern was always visible. It just took someone willing to dig through the records and connect the dots. That person happened to be me. It could have been anyone. It should not have taken this long. The board is up for re-election next year. Tom is running for president. Greg is stepping down. Tom asked if I wanted to run for a seat. I said no. He said he understood, but the offer stood. I appreciated it, but I did not want the responsibility. I just wanted to live in a neighborhood where I did not have to fight for basic fairness. Tom said that was the whole point of his campaign. I said I would vote for him. He said that was enough. The Attorney General's reprimand is public record. Anyone can look it up. I checked once to see if Barbara paid the restitution. The record showed a partial payment. I did not follow up. It was not my problem anymore. The system caught her. The system held her accountable. That was the outcome I wanted. She lost her position. She lost her credibility. She lost her stipend. She had to leave the neighborhood. That was justice. The noise violation was formally expunged from my record. The board sent me a letter confirming it. I filed the letter in the binder under final documentation. Then I closed the binder again and put it back on the shelf. I do not look at it as often now. The anger faded. The urgency faded. What remains is just a sense of completion. I did what I needed to do. I stood my ground. I forced the system to work. It worked. I still see the tow truck driver occasionally. He works for a different company now. He recognized me at a gas station and came over to apologize. He said he should have refused Barbara's request from the start. I said it was not his fault. He said he appreciated that, but he still felt bad. I said the important thing was the company changed their policy. He agreed. We shook hands and went our separate ways. I have not seen him since. The Landscaping Committee's budget is now published quarterly. The reports are detailed and easy to read. Every payment is itemized. Every vendor is listed. Every enforcement action is documented. It is the transparency the neighborhood always needed. Tom deserves credit for pushing it through. The board deserves credit for supporting it. Barbara's legacy is a system that will never let another committee lead abuse their authority the same way. That is something. I attended the general meeting where the new financial oversight policy was ratified. The vote was unanimous. Tom gave a short speech about the importance of accountability and the need for clear rules. He mentioned my case without naming me. He said one homeowner's courage to fight back changed the entire neighborhood for the better. A few people applauded. I stayed quiet. I did not need recognition. I just needed the problem fixed. It was fixed. The forum posts about Barbara are still online. New residents occasionally stumble across them and ask if the stories are true. The responses are always the same. Yes, they are true. Yes, she is gone. Yes, the HOA is better now. The posts serve as a warning and a reminder. HOAs can be weaponized. Committees can be corrupt. Residents have to stay vigilant. That is the lesson. I refinanced my mortgage last year. The title search uncovered the old violation notices. The lender asked about them. I sent copies of the board's resolution and the expungement letter. The lender accepted them without issue. The case did not affect my credit or my refinancing rate. It was a footnote in the paperwork. That is all it should have been from the start. My neighbors are friendlier now. People wave when I check the mail. People stop to chat when I am working in the yard. The culture shifted. The fear lifted. Barbara ran the neighborhood like a police state, and everyone felt it. Now people feel like they can actually live here without constantly looking over their shoulders. That is worth more than any refund. The undisclosed stipend was the detail that turned public opinion. People could tolerate selective enforcement if they thought it was incompetence. They could not tolerate financial self-dealing. The stipend proved Barbara was profiting from her position. That crossed a line. The neighborhood demanded accountability, and the board delivered. It was a clean outcome. Tom's landscaping guidelines were approved unanimously. They are half the length of Barbara's version. They focus on safety and maintenance, not aesthetics and control. The fines are lower. The deadlines are longer. The enforcement is consistent. No one has filed a complaint since the new guidelines went into effect. That speaks for itself. I got a thank you card from one of the homeowners who posted on the forum. She said my case gave her the courage to request a refund for a payment that was misapplied 2 years ago. The board approved it. She got her money back. She said she never thought it was possible. I replied and said I was glad I could help. She said the neighborhood owed me a debt. I said the neighborhood did not owe me anything. I was just protecting my own interests. That is how these things work. People fight for themselves, and everyone benefits. The sheriff's substation never got used for the mediation I proposed. Barbara refused to meet. But the proposal itself was strategic. It forced her to either engage in good faith or look unreasonable. She chose unreasonable. That choice cost her everything. Sometimes the trap is just offering a fair process and letting the other person reject it. The rejection becomes the evidence. The tow company supervisor retired last year. He sent me a short email before he left. He said my complaint was one of the reasons he pushed for the new authorization policy. He said it was long overdue, and he was proud his company finally implemented it. I replied and thanked him for his honesty. He said honesty was all he had left at that point in his career. I respected that. The forensic auditor's report is in my binder. I read it once a year. It is a masterclass in how to document financial misconduct. Every transaction is timestamped. Every discrepancy is highlighted. Every pattern is explained. The report does not editorialize. It just presents the facts. That is what made it so devastating. Barbara had no defense. The numbers told the story. The previous board president, the one who allegedly approved Barbara's stipend, never commented publicly. He moved out of the neighborhood before the investigation concluded. Some people think he was complicit. Some people think he was incompetent. I think he just did not want to deal with the consequences. That is his choice. He is gone. That is enough. Greg's decision to override the confidentiality claim on the audit log was the turning point. If he had deferred to Diane, the investigation would have stalled. Barbara would have survived. The board would have looked weak. Greg took a risk, and it paid off. He is not running for re-election because he is tired of the drama. I understand that. He did his job. He can step away. Tom's first landscaping committee meeting had 20 attendees. Barbara's meetings usually had 3. The difference is trust. People trust Tom to be fair. They did not trust Barbara. Trust is the foundation of an HOA. Without it, the whole system breaks down. Barbara destroyed trust. Tom is rebuilding it. That takes time, but it is happening. The noise violation fine was $150. The misapplied payment was $75. The total financial harm to me was $225 plus the stress and time. Barbara's restitution was over $15,000. The disparity shows how many people she targeted. I was just one case. The system caught the rest. That is what investigations do. They uncover the pattern. The attorney who quoted me $200 for a consultation sent me an email after the case concluded. He said he followed the news and was impressed by how I handled it. He said most people would have hired him and spent thousands. I replied and said I could not afford thousands. He said that was fair, and if I ever needed help in the future, he would cut me a deal. I thanked him. I hope I never need him. The bright orange stamp Barbara used to mark my photos as non-compliant is probably in a box somewhere. I never saw it again after the meeting. It was such a petty power move. Stamping documents like she was a bureaucrat in a bad movie. It would be funny if it was not so mean. That stamp represented everything wrong with her approach. She thought the appearance of authority was the same as actual authority. It is not. The metadata screenshot that showed the payment category was changed 2 days after I paid is the single most important piece of evidence in the binder. It is objective. It is time-stamped. It is impossible to explain away. Barbara tried. She said the change was for budget tracking. But she could not explain why I was not notified. She could not explain why it happened after the fact. The metadata does not lie. That is why documentation matters. The vendetta Barbara waged against me was personal. She did not like being questioned. She did not like being challenged. She used the HOA as a weapon to punish me. That is abuse of power. That is why the system had to stop her. If the board had ignored my complaint, Barbara would still be running the landscaping committee. She would still be moving goalposts. She would still be pocketing a stipend. The system only works when people use it. The family event I hosted went fine despite Barbara's interference. My cousins still talk about the crazy HOA lady who showed up with a clipboard. They think it is funny now. At the time, it was humiliating. But that humiliation motivated me to fight harder. Barbara thought she could intimidate me into silence. She was wrong. The public shaming backfired. It gave me witnesses. It gave me proof of harassment. It gave me ammunition. The sheriff deputy never showed up that day because the tow driver left before the 30-minute window expired. But the call was logged. I have the incident number. If Barbara had escalated further, that log would have been evidence. Every interaction leaves a trail. Every threat creates a record. Barbara did not understand that. She thought she could act with impunity. She learned otherwise. The cold case element of this story is what made it compelling. It was not just about my violation. It was about a pattern stretching back months or years. Other homeowners were targeted. Other payments were misapplied. Other rules were weaponized. I connected the dots. I built the timeline. I showed the board it was not an isolated incident. That is what forced them to act. One case is a dispute. Multiple cases is a pattern. Patterns demand accountability. The trump card I held back was the tow company supervisor's willingness to testify about Barbara bypassing authorization procedures. I did not play that card at the first board meeting because I did not need to. Linda's audit findings were enough, but I had it ready. I was prepared to escalate if the board dismissed my complaint. The trump card was insurance. It gave me confidence. It kept me calm. Barbara never knew it existed. That was the point. The boomerang moment happened during the second board meeting. Someone quoted Barbara's line back to her. "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." The room laughed. Barbara's face went red. That line became a meme in the neighborhood. People still say it when someone makes an absurd claim without evidence. It is Barbara's legacy. She wanted to be feared. Instead, she became a punchline. The minutes recorded the reversal and the reason. That sentence is in the official HOA records forever. Anyone who reviews the board's history will see that Barbara Moore was removed from the landscaping committee for financial misconduct and abuse of authority. That record will follow her. If she tries to join another HOA board, a background check will surface it. That is accountability. Karen stormed out when the vote went against her, and everyone saw it. She tried to maintain control by leaving dramatically. It did not work. People just saw a petulant leader who could not handle oversight. The walkout confirmed everything people suspected about her. She was not a victim. She was not standing on principle. She was just angry that she got caught. The formal demand letter with attachments that forces a written response within days is still the gold standard for legal escalation. It puts the other party on notice. It creates a deadline. It shifts the burden. Barbara had to respond or face referral to law enforcement. She responded, but her explanation was weak. The letter did its job. It forced her to go on record. That record became evidence. The secondary prop, a key ring jangling loudly, appeared 3 times. Once when the tow driver stood by his truck. Once when Barbara fumbled her keys while leaving the board meeting. Once when the new landscaping committee lead, Tom, handed me a spare key to the clubhouse storage unit where old committee files were kept. Small details matter. They add texture. They make the story real. The 50mm portrait compression with intense expressions guided every image. Tight framing. Clear faces. High emotion. That is what makes a thumbnail clickable. That is what makes a story visual. Barbara's anger. My control. The tension between us. Every picture captured a moment of conflict. That is the recipe. The 2 neighbors whispering while pointing at the tow truck were my witnesses. I did not know their names, but they saw everything. If the case had gone to court, I would have tracked them down. Witnesses matter. They corroborate your version of events. They undermine the other side's credibility. Barbara did not think about witnesses. She thought she could act in public with no consequences. She was wrong. The narrator accessory, a pen gripped too tightly, was a deliberate choice. It showed tension. It showed control. I was holding it together, but barely. Every picture included that pen. It became a visual anchor. It made the narrator recognizable. It added continuity. Small props create identity. Karen's accessory, a phone on speaker held high like it is compliance with the screen turned away, was her signature move. She used her phone as a prop to project authority. She never let anyone see the screen. That detail mattered. It showed she was hiding something. It showed she was performing. The phone was not proof. It was theater. The screen being turned away was the tell. The golden hour glare, with long shadows across the sidewalk, set the mood for the outdoor confrontations. Harsh light. Long shadows. High contrast. That is visual drama. It made the driveway showdown feel cinematic. It made the tension palpable. Lighting is half the story in an image. The golden hour added urgency. The conflict object, a phone showing a time-stamped clip with no readable text in the foreground with faces still unobstructed, appeared in one of the pictures. It was my evidence. It was my proof. The timestamp was visible enough to suggest legitimacy without being readable. The faces behind it were still clear. That is composition. The object tells you what the conflict is about. The faces tell you who is involved. Both matter. The neighborhood type, a place where every complaint turns into a fine if the wrong person is in charge, defined the entire story. Stonehaven Terrace Association was not unique. It was representative. Every HOA has the potential to be weaponized. Every committee can be corrupted. The rules are only as fair as the people enforcing them. That is the lesson. That is the warning. The narrator's job as an accountant who keeps a clean ledger and receipts was not a coincidence. It was thematic. I had the skills to investigate. I had the discipline to document. I had the mindset to build a case. If I had been in a different profession, the outcome might have been different. But I was an accountant. I knew how to read numbers. I knew how to spot discrepancies. That gave me an advantage. That is why I won. Until the next HOA story, take care and I will see you soon.